Hello and welcome to Forum 2020, Preservation Coast to Coast at Home. My name is Robin Ziegler, and I'm pleased to introduce you to our featured speaker who's kicking off our conference, Joe Minicozzi. Joe's an urban planner, imagining new ways to think about and visualize land use, urban design, and economics. Joe founded Urban 3 to explain and visualize market dynamics created by tax land use policies. Urban 3's work establishes new conversations across multiple professional sectors, including preservation, of course, multiple policymakers, and the public to creatively address the challenges of urbanization. Urban 3's extensive studies range geographically over 30 states, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. Joe holds a Bachelor of Architecture from the University of Miami and a Master of Architecture and Urban Design from Harvard University. In 2017, Joe is recognized as one of the 100 most influential urbanists of all time. Before I turn things over to Joe, there are just a few housekeeping items. First, I wanted to take this opportunity to thank NAPC staff, board, presenters, and sponsors who were able to switch gears and pull this conference off virtually. Kudos to all of you. At the conclusion of today's presentation, we will have time for live Q&A, so feel free to type your questions using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and Joe will answer them as time allows. A recording of this presentation will be available for 30 days after the conference ends. You'll receive an email in a few days that will explain how to access that recording. If you're an AIA member and want to receive continuing education credits for this session, please let us know you're in attendance by typing your name and AIA member number into the Q&A feature. If you're an APA or AICP member, you're responsible for self-reporting. I first had the pleasure of hearing Joe speak in Nashville, Tennessee, and his research, his perspective, and his message are an important one for all of us who want to use preservation as a way to help our communities grow smartly and equitably. It's my pleasure to turn this session over to Joe Minicozzi. Joe?
Thanks, Robin. I don't know if you all can see me. It looks like the video isn't live, but I'm waving hello to you all. I wish we were all in Tacoma, but I think we're all dealing with this together in the environment that we're in. So thanks for having me. I'm going to go through a lot of different examples of our work across the country, but let's see, where are you now working? But I want to start a little personally. I grew up in upstate New York, in Rome, New York, which is up near Utica, and Rome is such a dump that, like, this is actually their marketing material for Rome. It's in the middle of all of the action, so they don't even have action in Rome anymore. But if you're in Albany, why not drive 2 hours to Rome? Rome actually has some great history. It was the center of the Erie Canal, started in Rome, so it went east and west from Rome. The first shovel was turned in Rome. If you ever sang the Erie Canal song about the mule named Sal, you actually talk about our hometown. And this is Rome in its heyday. This is what it looked like. And it actually vied for being the state capital, but lost to Albany. In the 70s, when I was growing up as a kid, we lost all of our manufacturing. We struggled like a lot of Rust Belt places. And, long story short, they came up with this sort of Hail Mary pass to rebuild Fort Stanwich, which was part of the Revolutionary War battles. Now, we had this inconvenient issue of the geolocation of the fort was also under where our downtown was. So when I was a kid, a lot of this stuff got knocked down, and we replaced it with this wooden fort, which is a national monument. That's super awesome, but it killed our downtown. And we occasionally get some tourists, maybe a Canadian tourist and some buses of kids, but that's about it. Now, what was crazy is what the self-inflicted wound that my community did to itself beyond the fort. They expanded the rest of the downtown into an urban renewal area. They built a pedestrian mall because, hey, it's 1970s. We need a pedestrian mall, man. A plaza on the pedestrian mall because apparently the 12 acres of open space wasn't enough. So they added another 4. A couple parking garages because, you're going to drive over from Boston to see our fort. A new city hall because why not? And because this parking garage was way too far away, that's like 105 feet away, even though there's a people tube that connects the whole thing. In the wintertime, they built a surface lot because people are too lazy to walk 100 feet. Across those highway, there was a mall that was added to a strip mall. And the craziest thing ever, it was like Le Corbusier meets the Ponte Vecchio, this big concrete structure that was called the Living Bridge. and there were stores on it. And that was actually the first time I ever saw an escalator in my entire life, was in that building. And it was kind of this crazy science project, but it killed our city. At a personal level, this building right here was part of the urban renewal. They built this one-story building, and this is what they tore down. This is my Uncle Joe's pastry shop, and this was taken down because it was deemed blighted. And I had to grow up listening to my Uncle Joe every holiday complain about losing that asset of his. This is an immigrant son who built his own, or built up his own enough money to buy a building, and he created a business. And he's a trooper. And this is my Uncle Joe even making cakes of the fort and trying to celebrate it. But this is what happened to my family, and it kind of sat in the back of my mind throughout my life about the moves that people do in their community, and it has a real human effect aside from the architectural. But I did go to this church here and fell in love with that church, and fell in love with the architecture, and went to architecture school. So I moved out of upstate New York and went to University of Miami for architecture school, thinking that I'd be on a beach, but I chose the wrong profession for that. But while I was there, I studied under Liz Plater-Zyberg and Andreas Dwani, and they were talking about new urbanism and confronting this stuff. And this was new to me, that people actually grew cities in this insanely way of adding massive highways that immediately get clogged and building inhospitable environments for humans. And we used to joke about it. We'd call it this kind of cartoon landscape, but it's a real place called San Antonio. And this is happening all around us. We're just not paying attention to the policies that happen. Now, I had the luck of going to architecture school abroad in Rome, Italy, and I lived in this Rome, and this is where I lived, and this is where I went to school, and this is where I ate. So I was able to see this Rome that's been around for thousands of years, yet my Rome is dead as a doornail and didn't even make it 200 years. So why is it? How is it that some cities survive and some cities don't? And what is it that in the choices that people make? And to me, I can succinctly say it's a form of a DNA. That this is how I started life when I was 4 months old, and this is my path. I'm going to be my grandfather whether I like it or not, or more importantly, I'm going to be this guy, my father, again when I had hair. So I'm genetically Italian. There's not a lot I can do to change that. But we also suffer from a genetic predisposition from heart disease. So my dad has had a 7 bypass heart surgery. So I have to do things in myself to not have that issue. So I have to eat right and exercise. I have to make sacrifices today to have that longer view. And with cities, we need to be doing the same thing. We're making short-term decisions without understanding the long-term consequences. Conversely, now I live in Asheville, and it's a completely different city. It's up in the western part of the state, of the mountains of North Carolina, bluegrass music. We're known for our beer. We're 90,000 people. We have 40 breweries. That's about 2,500 people per brewery if you're doing the math on that. And like any quirky little town, we have men dressed as nuns on tall bikes that eat fire. It's your typical little place. But it didn't start this way. The story of Asheville has a similar trajectory, but a different path. So this is how Asheville started, as a settlement. 15 years later, this is what it became. And we like to say the 3 T's made Asheville: trains, tourism, and tuberculosis. And it changed rapidly. Second streetcar line in the entire country. Presidents came to visit. We've got Teddy Roosevelt right here. And in the 1920s, we were growing at 20% in population growth every single year of the decade. It's interesting that people now complain about growth. It's like, this is nothing compared to the 1920s. We became the second largest city in North Carolina, which was bigger than Charlotte. The only city that was bigger than us was Winston-Salem. And we achieved the highest debt per capita of the entire United States. We were number 1 in debt. Isn't that awesome? And when our books were audited, we thought we had $5 million in the bank. It turned out we had $18,000.
Joe, can I interrupt you for a second? Can you get rid of the black box screen?
We entered the Depression. Thomas Wolfe, famous American author, this is what he had to say about his hometown. Asheville has squandered fabulous sums. They've flung away the earnings of a lifetime. They've mortgaged those of a generation to come. They have ruined a city. And in doing so, they've ruined themselves, their children, and their children's children. Not a great thing to say about your hometown. Incidentally, his second book was called You Can't Go Home Again, for obvious reasons, because basically he was threatened and told to stay away. But he was right. He basically nailed it on how we were growing and the decisions we made. But on the flip side, we actually chose to pay off that debt, and it took us until 1976. So we were essentially locked down and fallow until July of 1976. And here they are burning the last bond payment. Here's Miss Asheville with her tiara holding the last bond. This is Billy Graham. It's a big deal, and Billy shows up. But check this out. Look at how embarrassed we were. It's the third headline in the paper. Somebody dying in a prison fire in some other county led that day. But when we got out of debt, we started doing what other cities did, not thinking through. Now, this is the 70s and 80s at this point. We should have known better, but we cut a highway through the downtown, which became the Crosstown Expressway, and the coup de grace was blowing the mountain open. I love that it's on a postcard. So they blew the mountain open and ran a highway across it. Now, incidentally, the community fought DOT and proved it was cheaper to do a tunnel through the mountain. And DOT's like, well, we don't have the technology to do a tunnel. And everybody's like, there is a tunnel right here on Tunnel Road. That is about a football field away. We did that in 1920. But anyway, DOT won, obviously, and the mall happened on the other side of the cut and downtown died. These are shots of downtown Asheville from the 1980s, 1990s. That's a 1996 Chevy Celebrity. So this isn't too long ago, and it's just absolutely boarded up. And the community said, this isn't who we are. We're rural mountain people. We're not urban. We're not city people. Neglecting the fact of, in the whole span of human civilization, we've always lived in a form of some kind of city. That the recent phenomena of suburbia is just a blip in our lifespan. So I worked for Julian Price's company, Public Interest Projects. We're still in their office. Pat Whalen is the president, and Julian inherited a tremendous amount of money, and he put it into a for-profit real estate investment company, a real estate development company. 75% of the money would go into building rehab and building creation. 25% would go into business startup. So this is one of our buildings before and after, and it's real rocket science. It's, converting an old hotel into apartments. But this went against the trend. It went against the market. It went against what other people were doing. Yet we were just looking at this span of history in cities and understanding what we're doing. But what's crazy is how people talk about cities, the data of how they talk about cities, is that it's more of an emotional discussion rather than the informational discussion about what's going on economically. So if we look at the buildings like a crop, when you talk to farmers, they're talking about land as a product. They're talking about the economics of a crop, water per acre, fertilizer per acre, labor per acre, crop yield per acre. It's all an economic model. So let's do the same with this building. So the city did the streetscape project. So thank you, city, for a garbage can, a bike rack, 2 benches, and a street tree. We put in retail, office, and residential. So we took the taxable value from $300,000 to $11 million, which means the city yielded 3,500% more taxes in 15 years on the property. So do you have a 401k plan that grows by 3,500% in 15 years? That's a really good return. And people responded immediately with their biases. And they're like, well, Joe, that's $11 million. We've got this Walmart, it's 20 million, it's double the value. It's like, yeah, it's also 34 acres under that Walmart versus 0.2 in this building. So it's not a fair way to look at it when you look at the gross value. Per acre, that mixed use building is producing 100 times more property taxes, is producing double the retail taxes. It's got residential, Walmart doesn't, and it's also got a lot more jobs. So when you stack it up side by side, which would you rather have? Which would you rather grow? I was presenting this in Colorado, and I asked them, if you could grow an acre of anything in Colorado, what would you grow, weed or marijuana? And they all laughed, but it's true. It's like, it's a cash crop. We understand that with cash crops, understand it with buildings. So I want you to know, this isn't complex math that I'm doing here. It's just the wealth of cities that were created by those urban products that afforded the ability for us to do suburbia. And we've sort of lost that memory muscle. So here's a simple way of looking at it. When we talk about cars, we don't talk about cars on a miles per tank basis, do we? Imagine if I said my Ford F-150 gets 650 miles per tank. What would you say to me? You're like, Joe, that's stupid. It's got a big tank. So rather than total value, let's do value per acre. The numbers change, and we should all be driving BMW Isettas at 70 miles per gallon. So it's that efficiency that we're after, not the quantity. And really what I've kind of learned in this whole process is that we're functionally illiterate about our tax system. And I showed this quote from Mark Twain at a Smart Growth conference in 2009, and I had my hand in the air. And I asked the whole audience, I said, so who in this room has read your local tax assessment policies to understand the methodology of tax assessment? And not a single person raised their hand, yet they're all working in making cities work or trying to make cities work. And I said, so you're functionally illiterate in tax policy. You're choosing not to read it, and yet it's undermining everything that you're trying to achieve. Simply put, when you make a cheap building, you're paying lower taxes. So tax policy matters because we have to run cities, and you all know this. You've been very involved with historic tax credits. You know that there's a game inside the system, and you have certain weapons to use them. So to use that knowledge to spread it into other fields and other peer groups that you interact with, particularly in government. I know that this is East Coast, West Coast. I'll just show you an Oregon example. California adopted Prop 13 in 1978. And this is a map of all of the other states that basically ripped off California. It's interesting that as much grief as Oregonians give Californians, they basically follow the same policies. But this is Oregon's. This is just showing you a snapshot of the real market value, RMV, the assessed value, and the taxable value. The lower of the three numbers is the one that gets taxed in Oregon, which is kind of quirky. But let's just take this one on the corner right here. You can see the dramatic deduction down to the taxable. It's about a third the value. So that's what's paying the taxes right there. Now, what's crazy is this is what's going on.
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Yeah, sure.
There's a build order gray box showing up on your screen. I think it's from your slides, your PowerPoint effects, but it's showing up on top of your slides.
The whole time?
Yeah, we tried to jump in a few minutes ago.
Oh, I didn't hear you. Darn. All right. Well, how's
it was
that?
only in the bottom right corner. Yeah, the screen's a little muted. Oh, there we go. Yep, you're good to go. Sorry, continue on.
Okay. So on the blue line here, and this is a nice little chart that Lane County put out. Here's what's going on with real market value. But look what's going on with the assessed value and the taxable value. See how there's a drop right here? That's because of the recession or the effects of the recession. It's a lag from when the recession actually happened. But you can see it actually reflected both in the market value and then subsequent lag in the taxable value. But really the question you should be asking you is the price of concrete, the price of labor, the price of asphalt, the price of a piece of wood, is it following the blue line or is it following the red line? So if you're taxing yourself on the red line, yet the market conditions change dramatically following the blue line, that's great that you're taxing yourself less, but now you can't afford your government. You can't afford the price of a police car or a piece of paper. And this is what we're doing to ourselves. And it feels good to say, I don't want to pay taxes, but ultimately you have to run a government because taxes pay for stuff. So here's what's going on in Asheville. We didn't get a new building in downtown Asheville until 2008. So what you see here is the growth in value just by fixing up and doing historic preservation. But to show you that it's not all love and roses in Asheville, these are some campaign ads from the 1990s. And this guy, Chris Peterson, complaining about the $26 million of urban design in the community for streetscape projects and parking garages. Okay, Chris has a point. $26 million is a lot of money. But let's do some math here. If you invest $26 million on a $100 million asset and it grows to 500, is investing 26 and yielding 430, is that a good return on investment? Yeah. So why don't we just show people this stuff and do the math and explain it to people? Chris is entitled to his opinion. He's not entitled to the facts. And you're not going to stop Chris. Don't even think about it. Chris has a website now with fire and brimstone. This is a lightning bolt hitting my mayor in the head. I asked the mayor, I'm like, is that a liquor drink? And she goes, it should be. You know, people will go off like this, but until you confront them with facts and information, one is you don't have a chance, but two is you're going to talk to regular people and they might get it. So what we talk to people about is what the city is. The city is a large piece of land that's basically one huge real estate development project. So in our case in Asheville, for us to annex land. Only city in the state that has that gift given to it by the state. But in Oregon, where you have growth boundaries, this is something that you have to stress over. That land is really critical. And I use the word incorporate deliberately because read this. This is straight from the Oxford American Dictionary. To constitute a company, a city, or other organization is a legal corporation. So by law, our cities are incorporated. They're really big real estate development companies that just happen to have a board of directors that are elected. It's not your city, it's your state, it's your county, it's also our country. Joe Biden said this on the Stephen Colbert Show in 2016. The United States is the largest corporation in the world. I'm such a nerd, I immediately started looking it up at midnight, and there's the code if anybody wants it on the bottom of the slide. So my city of Asheville at $14 billion is 6 times the value of Ted Turner in taxable value. When you add in the assets that it owns of roads and pipes and all that stuff, now you're pumping over about 36 billion. And would you expect Ted Turner to just look at Facebook every day? So why do we let our community do that? Why do we fall prey to these emotional arguments rather than looking at what they are and understanding the value of the architecture? So we've done this all across the country. And when you stack up the data, for every dollar of county taxes per acre somebody out in the county is paying to the county, their brother and sister is paying about 5 times that to the county. Here's the Walmart, there's the mall, there's a 2-story building. This could be Driggs, Idaho, Durham, North Carolina, or Dallas. As soon as you start stacking stories, it's an exponential jump. This is 6 stories and 3 stories. So you're building your wealth by building that urbanity. Conversely, all that old stuff that our great grandparents left us is terribly valuable and productive, but we've drained it to build suburbia. So some people look at my information and they're like, Joe, let's just face it, you hate Walmart. If that's what your takeaway is, you're totally missing the point. I presented at the International Association of Assessing Officers Conference. Let that wash over you for a second. It makes a planning conference feel like Burning Man by comparison. This guy got up and presented at 8 in the morning on how cheap Walmarts are. Now, assessors are awesome. They're very rigorous people. They're very smart people, and they have really crazy math skills. But they're also agnostic about value. So if it's a cheap building, it's a cheap building. They can't add more value to it. So this guy is basically getting all of his property taxes lowered in one meeting. It's brilliant. Now, I was freaking out because I'm trained as an architect, and I'm like, how is he getting away with this? And so I basically walked up to the microphone and I asked him, I said, Mr. Terrell, what's the useful life of one of your buildings? And he immediately shot back, 15 years, maybe 20. We designed the building to depreciate as quickly as possible so we can maximize depreciation, and then we'll build another building and depreciate it down again. So for those of you that have this experience of time, you've seen the Walmart go dark and another one pop up just a little bit further out. This is part of their business model. Don't hate the player, hate the game. Understand the game and understand that they're just following the tax policies. But these are our tax policies to control if we're literate in them. So if that's what you want, if you want cheap buildings, then great. Have a property tax system based on value. That's what you get. So there's a perverse incentive that when you tax on value, you get piles of junk. Or if you're okay with it, their lifetime commitment to you is the life cycle of a cat. That's all you get is 10 to 15 years or 15 to 20 years. I'm a dog person. This is a joke, but I'm just trying to drive the point home about valuation and investment in your corporation. And to me, it's like it from a lot of people that are just, why don't people just see this stuff? You know, I don't have a financial, I don't have a master's of finance or anything like that. This is just looking at information. So if I can show you your brain with your creative thought processes in green and your brainstem activity in blue, can I do an economic MRI of your place? Can we see the flow of the money? So this is Hennepin County, home to Minneapolis. You can see where downtown Minneapolis is. I don't even have to label it. That's the productivity. So how do we do that is, let me explain. It's a series of maps. So this is my county, total value. So I have non-taxable, this big park right here, low value in green, high value in purple. This is the Biltmore estate. America's largest house is worth $100 million. So that's super awesome. But it's really not a fair way of looking at it because it's also a 180,000 square foot house sitting on 8,000 acres of land. It has the biggest gas tank. So rather than total value, let me show you value per acre, or I'll just show it to you in 3D. Can you guess where downtown Asheville is? You know, so not only can you see downtown Asheville, but you can also see our little sister of Black Mountain 9 miles away. You can see its little downtown right there. And those are just 2- and 3-story buildings kicking it up. So in defense of my cousins who live out here in Fairview, they honestly have no idea where the county is getting all of its money. So we have to show it to them so they can understand that. Conversely, you can see how low wealth the sprawl is in its high infrastructure. So that's just North Carolina. Usually the first pushback we get in every state we go to, we're different. Our policies are different. And that's true, but you're not that different. So here's California. This is Santa Rosa, California, the Sonoma County area. And you can see downtown Santa Rosa right there. This is Kansas City, Kansas, and Kansas City, Missouri. You can see downtown Kansas City, Missouri popping up. You can even see downtown Kansas City, Kansas right there. This is Country Club Plaza. You can see the valuation and the urban design reflected commensurately. This is Manchester, New Hampshire. Can you guess where downtown is? Bozeman, Montana, and even Brevard, North Carolina, which is a community of 8,000 people. You can see it's downtown. Again, the urban form is reflected in the valuation. So what about retail? Certain states run off retail, like Washington, California, Colorado. This is back to Minneapolis for a second. This was fun because they have Mall of America. So there's Mall of America right there. It's retail production, 100% retail environment. And I was asking my analyst, I'm like, hey, Josh, where's downtown? And he's like, oh, it's up over here. So here's downtown Minneapolis at the same retail productivity compared to Mall of America, about 10 times the production. And again, downtown has housing, offices, government buildings, civic centers, and all that stuff, yet it's that much more productive with retail dollars. Do the math on this stuff and map it. This is just spatial analysis, and I know this joke doesn't work for people under the age of 35s, but I like this joke. Back to California for a second. This is Redlands, California. We asked the community what this tall spike was, and everybody said it's the tallest building downtown. And we're like, no, it's actually this. And you can just look at the numbers. The bank's pulling 6 million an acre. This little 2-story building's pulling 21 million an acre. And it is what it is. That's the productivity. Now, this is due to several factors. One is Prop 13. There's also people invested in this building, but it also doesn't have a big surface parking lot liquidating the value the way that this one does. So the density matters as well as design. But this little shoe repair shop right here, which is scabbed onto the side of this building, this is actually a little spite building that's 7 feet wide. 3 acres of that little shoe repair building that you'd probably never notice would equal the 13-acre Walmart. It's like, what would happen if somebody tried to build this shoe repair building in today's world? Like, what historic resources committee would you send them through for an architectural review, and what zoning code would you bludgeon them with about how it's inappropriate? Yet this is a small building that was a minimum amount of investment that actually has been there for 100 years, producing wealth. Incidentally, one block of the historic core of downtown, if you had 18.5 acres of that, it would equal the 120-acre shoppertainment complex that's at the edge of town in both retail and property tax production. Or another way of looking at it from a land consumption standpoint, 18 acres is that area on the left versus the 120 acre this. So we can produce more wealth on less land, basically, which is an incredible resource. Now, this also connects to climate change and carbon production and all this other stuff. But what's crazy about Redlands is what they did to themselves from a history standpoint. On the right of this image, all those buildings are gone. They wiped them all out. So these people had crazy technology called horses, and they built this incredible wealth. This building, gone. Teddy Roosevelt slept here. President Taft spoke here. Yet that building's gone, has been replaced by a Stater Brothers grocery store, pulling a whopping $500,000 of value per acre. Now remember, that little shoe store was close to $4 million. So they tore some buildings down in their downtown. So we went back on the Sanborn maps and pulled all of these old buildings and basically brought them back to life. So there they are today. This is the mall that's today, which is dead as a doornail, pulling about 6 million. Here's what they threw away, about 21 million. So they basically flushed $15 million of wealth down the toilet to go toward that modern box. And this, again, the gift that our great grandparents have left us that they turned away from. So when we don't have the money for the Greenway, the art teacher, the dancing traffic cop, it's not that you don't have the money, it's that you've displaced that money into a subsidized form of development. That's the reason why the market is producing it. And oftentimes people are just like, well, you just want big buildings everywhere. And I'm like, no, you're missing the point. So Charleston, South Carolina, really old place. Here's Charleston. We told them, like, you can't depend on the ocean for your wealth because humans created. So they have old buildings that of independence. So just grabbing everything older than that birth date that you see on this slide here. Here they are. This building was built in 1686. It's called the Red Dot Liquor Store, and this is a revolutionary getting his drink on. But just grabbing the old revolutionary buildings, here they all are. Here they are in plan. So about 21 acres of colonial architecture. And in 2015, they kicked out $630,000 of county property taxes. They paid city taxes and a business improvement district tax on top of it. Out in the county, we have a Walmart, same number of acres, and this is what it paid the same year. Same land area, two totally wildly different tax bills to the county. And as we know, these buildings are not only 13 times the productivity, they've been doing it for 240 years. That Walmart's not going to last 200 years. It's going to probably last to 2025, and that's it. So if we're not talking about this, about building wealth and long-term wealth for our community, it's completely tied toward the preservation of our architecture, but also the longevity of our communities and culture of our communities. One of the frequent responses we get is, but Joe, we're growing. We have plenty of money. It's like, all right, well, we did an analysis of Lafayette, Louisiana, which is growing. It's a Sun Belt. We did this project with Chuck Marone, and I'd highly recommend following Strong Towns and Chuck's work. But we basically, Chuck's a civil engineer, and we did the physical asset analysis or full return on investment for this community. So you can see their downtown right here. This is some new urbanism called River Ranch, which is basically mimicking downtown architecturally. You can see it's also mimicking it financially. And then they spread out into the swamps, which is super expensive. They have a lot of pavement, 6 square miles of asphalt. So we did a distributive model to send people a bill for where they live. So it's your choice. You want to live way the hell out here on this dead end street. Well, guess what? You're going to pay for that entire dead end, but you're also going to pick up a little piece of the entire system, because that's your transportation demand. As we were talking about it, one of the counselors said this to me. It's not where you live, it's what you believe. What does that even mean? I was just kind of stunned. It was kind of funny. They're Cajun people. The public works director said this: there's no such thing as an infrastructure ferry. We only have $250,000 to chip and seal our roads. That's all we got. You get to pick a quarter mile, go for it. And I thought that was so funny so we had to Photoshop Kevin into the infrastructure fair. We just couldn't resist. But Kevin's like, show this to them. So it's like, all right, well, here's the problem. If you ever talk to the finance officer in any city, they're going to talk about a CAFR standard. That's what they have to follow as their rules for how they make their financial statements. And roads are listed as assets. When Chuck and I sat down with the finance officer, I said, Lori, look, if my computer in my business is an asset, if I have a delivery vehicle, that's an asset. If I have real estate, that's an asset. But I can tell you that real estate, that van, and my computer, can you pick your roads up and sell them to Baton Rouge? And she goes, no. And Chuck goes, that's a liability. And she goes, but our CAFR standards. I'm like, we're not going to follow your CAFR standards. And no one from the GFOA, the government finance officers, are going to show up and give me a demerit. We're going to cash flow you like a piece of real estate. So here's the deal. On the right is their road liability of what they currently hold in red. That's their deficit. And on the left is the money that they actually have coming in for the roads. So let me ask you a completely complex financial question. Do you have enough blue to pay for the red? So their liability is 18 times their revenue, but they've already started going out and getting loans. So the bonding companies come in and skim off the top their revenue. So this is like taking out a credit card to pay off your mortgage. It doesn't work that way. You basically lose money. So this is their whole city floating in a lake, and we sent everybody a bill for where they live. These are their choices. And then in green are the revenues that we draw out of everybody. So you, like in any business model, you want to subtract your expenses against your revenues to find out what's in the black versus what's in the red. And there it is. Here's the whole county in 3D. You can see them bleeding their money all over the place. And if you drop this on the floor so everything pops up vertical, this is what it looks like. If anybody's colorblind, this is a colorblind version. But basically you can see how upside down this stuff is out here versus how positive this stuff in the core is. And this really comes down to infrastructure. And in their case, when you get out here, you're fighting Mother Nature, you're fighting wetlands because it's all stormwater that you're dealing with. So they told me, they're like, well, Joe, people really want to live out here. I said, well, hell yeah, that's what you're paying them to move out there. That's called a subsidy, and make sure you write it down and you can afford it. But it's crazy when you go into the Sanborn maps, you can find stuff like this. This is 1950. Their population was 34,000. They had 5 feet of pipe per person, 2.4 fire hydrants per 1,000. They grew their population, but here's their feet of pipe per person today and their fire hydrants per 1,000 today. So they grew their population 350%. They grew their liabilities 1,000 and 2,000%. This makes no sense. Yet every American city was doing this post-war because they weren't looking long-term. It was all about just feeding today and what people want. Well, you know what? I want to be 6 foot tall and have a full head of hair. I think that you should pay for it. Like, what kind of nonsense is that? Yet we run our cities that way. Do the math on this stuff and show them. And their response when they saw this, they're like, well, we got rich. It's like, okay, fine. We'll check your wealth. Your household income adjusted for today's dollars went from about 28,000. You were poor. You're now richer than we are in Asheville, but that's only 160% growth in revenue. It's 1,000 and 2,000% growth in liability. This is absolutely insane. Surely this is an isolated condition. It's just people in Louisiana. They're crazy, not us. Okay. Lancaster, California, up and over the mountain from Los Angeles, is an exurb of Los Angeles. Here's their city. They don't have a great downtown. They're working on it, but they generally spread themselves out first before they decided to work on their downtown. Not a good recipe. So they actually built up about 953 miles of roads in their community, which is basically they built a road from Los Angeles to Portland inside their city, which is insane. But they're not alone in this. A lot of cities did this. So here's when they built their roads. So their great grandparents went on a little road building spree in the early 1900s. Then everybody went to sleep until World War II. And you can't help but notice what happened in 1953 when their grandparents built all of that lane miles. Well, guess what? When you drop all that road, it comes back to haunt you 50 years later when it asks for that rebuild that happens 50 years later. So in 1983, they were hit with this huge capital expense. And what did the council do? They did more development, annexed more land, looked for more revenue, did more permits, whatever, but you also built more roads. So this comes back with the second rebuild and brings along with it the new stuff. So basically we're doubling down on the problem. And we stopped them in 2016 and said, you're not building another road from here to infinity. This is what your build rebuild schedule looks like for your roads. So that first wave was just kind of stupid, and no one penciled that out. Please, I'll give everybody, I'll give you $100 if you can find me some document in the 1950s where they're penciling out the future cost replacement reserves of becoming suburbia. Here's the second wave, because we doubled down on the damage, because we convinced ourselves, oh, this is who we are now. This is what we want. All right. Well, now look at this. We're not adding roads, and it's getting bigger and bigger. Every American city is going through this. This is a crisis of our carrying capacity of our infrastructure. So we flushed all of their money into their road system just to give them a graphic of what they could afford and what they can't afford. They basically can't afford 50% of their roads. Now, this isn't to say that all those roads that are in red are going to disappear or that they should unplug them, but they need to understand the magnitude of what they're dealing with financially. And this is, again, like I said, this is an American problem of somebody else out in the future is going to pay for this. Well, here we are, 80 years away from World War II. We should be looking at this stuff and realizing we are the future. Okay, I understand this is depressing. There is a way out. We did some work in Eugene, Oregon, and here's their revenue model. You can see their downtown, and here's their costs commensurate with their revenues. So what's in the black and what's in the red. And when you look at their model, you can see how positive. They have a really strong downtown. They also have a really strong area on the other side of the university over here. If you lift this thing up like you're looking for a salamander under a rock or something, this is the spread of the subsidy across the model, and it's pretty uniform. And what it comes down to is we made this Brady Bunch slide of building types. So you've got residential, low density, medium density, high density, mixed use, low, medium, high, commercial, low, medium, high. And these are the sticker prices. And we showed them that single family detached house consumes a lot of infrastructure and gives you very little revenue. And it's real simple. We tax ourselves not a lot to be a resident. We're the ones that make the rules. And so we basically give ourselves gifts. But when the thing that's crazy about this isn't new. This isn't groundbreaking that we're doing. The Nixon administration did this in 1973 with the sprawl document. We have the data. It goes back to the 60s when they started running this stuff. But the reaction is, well, Joe, but I want a house. Yeah, that's fine. But 80% of your land use in that subsidy, that's not smart. So that's like me having 80% of my diet is pizza. Not going to be good for my cholesterol if I do that. So I have to mix some salads in. So down on the housing and focus on some of them. Like, sure, yeah, definitely add some buildings downtown, do that. But look up here at Crescent Village. You can see this little bump that pops up here. Do 4 more of those. It's like focus on that, grow your wealth before you do more subsidy. And incentives, look for incentives. There's incentives baked all throughout the system that are all suburban biases that are within it. This is just the dirt value model of the city of Cheyenne, Wyoming. So you expect the world to look like this. Up here, you see this whole neighborhood in the upper left is all blue. That's all $15,000 an acre. And when I was presenting to the community, I asked them about this parcel right here, this $15,000 an acre for the dirt. And you can tell it's a mall, but again, there's no buildings here. This is just the dirt under the mall. It's $15,000 an acre. When you cross the street, it doubles to 40. And I asked the community, I said, how does the land double in value in the same zoning category? It's the same police district, fire district, school district, everything. How does land double in value? And the assessor raised her hand and just yelled at me. She goes, no, no, no. They have more land over here. And the more land you have, the lower the value. Let that wash over you for a second. The more land you get, the lower the per unit value of it. And I said, okay, so I've got 3 miles of streets around this property. This fella's got 200 feet. And she goes, yeah, we don't count infrastructure as part of the valuation. I said, so the money that you put into the ground, you don't ever want it back. She goes, well, that's not part of our standard. So I went to the assessors conference. The reason why I was there was to ask them about this because their magazine is called Fair and Equitable. And I asked them, I said, how is this fair and how is it equitable? Now, to their credit, they're like, it's not. I'm like, where did this standard come from? Did Moses deliver this? And they thought this was hilarious. But they're like, yeah, we have no idea. But we probably need to change that. When's the last time you attended an assessor's meeting, an assessor's conference, or just go talk to the assessor? You know, if we're not questioning what their biases are and what their assumptions are, they're going to be undermining what happens in the market. This isn't a free market. These are choices that are being made for us, all within the math of the system, and they're not equitable. So speaking of equity, I don't know if y'all, I'm sure you all know about redlining. For those of you that don't, redlining was created in 1934, part of the numerous factors. One was fighting socialism, giving more people access to housing, also building more localized wealth, but it basically expanded mortgages from a 7-year window to about a 30-year window. But what the federal government wanted to do was have maps of every local community could make their own map of what's good, what's desirable, what's declining, and what's hazardous. And they left it up to the local community to basically self-inflict these wounds. And you can see like a place like Birmingham redlined a heck of a lot more real estate than, let's say, Philadelphia right here. This is an incredible resource. It's the University of Richmond. Here's the website up here. I can email it to you all as well. It's called Mapping Inequality, but they put up everybody's redline maps. We use this site all the time to pull down people's redline maps. And we did it in Kansas City. The Kauffman Foundation asked us to do the analysis there. So here's Kansas City, Kansas. You can see it's downtown popping up at a $3 million an acre of value. When we brought their cousins in from Missouri, we had to knock them down a little bit because Missouri starts at 10 million, and you can see the power of the Missouri side in its potency. For both its downtown, but also Country Club Plaza, which is a streetcar suburb from the 20s that J.C. Nichols did. But you can see right in the map, there's a plateau line right here where everything shifts when you get east over here. Well, the red line on this map is Troost Avenue, Troost like roost with a T. East of Troost, you see all of this red line stuff, red and yellows, mostly on the east side of Troost. So green and blue are good. So you see them over here. We went ahead and dropped this on a racial map. So remember, redlining went from 1930s to 1960s. In the 1960s, everybody was like, oh yeah, this is wrong. But for 3 decades, 3 generations, people had this restriction on their personal wealth building. So if you're Black in this neighborhood that's been redlined, which is how they redlined it for them, you're basically stuck with your house because you can't sell it to somebody because somebody can't get a mortgage because they've been restricted. Or it's going to go through some weird marketplace where it's sort of predatory. But for the most part, we're looking for the long-term effects of this. So we dropped it on a map of race. So you have white people are blue, Black people are green. And here we are in 2020, and you can see that African Americans are still trapped in those districts. Now, the economic side of it, we're looking for the collapse. So what we're doing is looking for these vacant lots, because if you can't sell your land, you're going to pass it on to your kids. Your kids are going to move to Chicago. They're going to manage the house long term or long distance, and just it's going to be a nuisance for them because it's going to be difficult to transact it. And sooner or later, it's going to decay or fall down, or it's going to be take part of one of those predatory systems and just get slumlorded into the ground. But you see the strong correlation between vacant land and redlining districts. So on the Kansas side, you're looking at 3 square miles of vacant property that has streets, pipes, roads, all of that stuff. And on the Missouri side, it's even bigger, 7 square miles. That's a lot of real estate. So when you tapestry that back on the valuation model, again, here we are. We stopped doing redlining 60 years ago, and you see the average value per acre of each district just taking this haircut all the way down to the redline districts. And the redline districts are half, a little bit more than half the yellow areas, which is insane. So on the Kansas side, it's even worse. And the Kansas City, Kansas people were really cool. They're like, could you dig in a little deeper? So let's just take this one neighborhood up here on the north. You see all the vacant land. What's your attitude if you're in that community and there's that much vacancy, in a lot of it owned by the city, that's not paying taxes, that's not part of your community? How would you feel? Well, you're not going to pay your taxes. So these are all the delinquencies on top of that. This is how we're undermining our own community, by basically not addressing equity in the true sense of people's personal equity within their neighborhoods. So here are the 732 lots. They're averaging a value of $400 for their taxable value for the vacant lot, which is ridiculously low. Now, putting a house on it isn't much better. It's $17,000. So the average lot value of a building lot is $17,000, but $17,000 is 40 times more than 40. So we went back in time and grabbed the old value of the red line areas, because they actually have the valuation of the buildings, and brought it forward today in net present value, and basically said, what if we glued houses back? What if we hit the delete button on redlining and said it never happened? How much taxes would we have today had we not done this? So what was the cost of being racist? So gluing all of those houses back on and running the bills, basically in this one neighborhood, this one half square mile neighborhood, that's $30 million. And I told them, I said, look, y'all, your great grandparents essentially followed racist policy. They weren't alone in doing that. This is a federal policy that was created this racism. But what they basically did for this one neighborhood is they wrote a check for $30 million. They walked out in the street with it and just lit it on fire. They burned $30 million in this one neighborhood of lost tax opportunity because they followed racist policies. That's the cost of this. And you could turn that around. To stop it in this one neighborhood, you only need 18 houses. Start small. Just do some infill. Find somebody locally to invest in, to be a builder, and do this. Surely you can find 18 people to move in this neighborhood. But you know what's going to happen when you build those 18 houses or try to pay for them? The banks are going to show up and say, oh, the house costs $180,000, the tax value is $17,000. There's no way we're going to give you a mortgage. Is that economic or is that racist? The bank's going to argue it's economic. I'll argue that it's racist because it's built on a racist foundation of what pushed the snowball down the hill in the first place. But you're not going to change the banks. You can't call them racist because they won't get it. So what you can do is you can put out a bond for 18 houses. You can pull 18 houses out of your revenue, out of your general fund, and just create a revolving fund that just helps heal your community and invest in your community. It's that simple if you want to repair it. So it's not just them. We did the study in South Bend and similar patterns. And we went ahead and did that citywide, adjusting for inflation on their dollars. And South Bend was in really good shape up until World War II. And very powerful. But here's their values today, their model today. Here's what it looked like if you didn't do redlining, if you adjust for the 1930s value. So you can see how much more potent their city was back then. So basically, by following redlining, they threw away about $1 billion of taxable value. It didn't just totally vaporize. What it did is it transferred out into the county, because they basically shifted all of that population into the county. They didn't gain wealth, but they lost that opportunity for folks in those neighborhoods to hold that wealth. That's the loss of equity, personal equity, to the African-American community. Or actually in South Bend's case, they also hit some immigrants with it as well. Surely redline's history is just for fun. Maybe it's a sixth sense of fun, but this newspaper article came out in South Florida. This is the Sun Sentinel, and it's about these mansions. They do this every December. They write about rich people because it's South Florida and they're vapid. But Here's all of the mansions paying, and these are their tax bills. This mansion's paying $1 million in taxes. This is a really fun one. It's got a separate red and white wine tasting rooms. I don't know what you do for a blush. I guess you meet in the hallway, but it's 58,000 square foot mansion. Okay, $1 million in property taxes. This one's paying 1.5 million because it's got two mansions, because you don't want to be in the same mansion with your spouse. You want to move them across the street. This mansion has a golf course on the ocean. Yeah, because you need that. Well, you all know me. I'm an apples to apples guy. So rather than total value, let's do value per acre, and let's rearrange them based on potency. So actually the smallest one's the most potent. The golf course one is the least potent, and the double mansion's in the middle of the pack. So that's the way it rolls out. So let's go from them to the bottom 99%, the multi-dollar mansions, the schlubs like us and our tax bills. So this is middle income Palm Beach County. So we got Delray and West Palm Beach, all the way down to communities of low wealth, predominantly of color, in Northwest neighborhood and downtown West Palm Beach and the Pleasant City neighborhood. And when you look at their taxes, like she's paying $1,000 in taxes, her total tax bill. But again, that's not a fair way of looking at it, because she's in the shotgun shack that's, the size of a parking space. So per acre, she's crushing it at 32,000. So you probably don't remember those mansions. Let's take this guy up here at 77,000. He's actually more tax productive than the golf course one. He doesn't have an ocean view. He doesn't have a golf course. He doesn't even have a yard. His jacuzzis in his parking space. But what's crazy is it's the oldest block in Palm Beach County. He doesn't even have a street. He's got this thing called Mango Promenade, which is a sidewalk that cuts through the block. So he's got low infrastructure demand, and that's pretty productive. Let's go from them to something that we used to do that was kind of a normal thing, townhouses. These are illegal in a lot of cities from a zoning standpoint, but here they are, urban townhouses in Palm Beach County, producing $5,000 and $8,000 in their tax bills, but per acre they're crushing it. It's $278,000 to $400,000 of taxes. So per acre, those are more productive than the double mansion. And that's, again, how we build our wealth. How can we learn from our past to understand this form of urbanism was commonplace 100 years ago? Now it's an anathema. And this is usually where I stop, but I couldn't stop myself. We went ahead and grabbed this guy's property. This is the American Medal of Freedom winner, Rush Limbaugh. This is his mansion in Palm Beach County on the ocean. Just looking at his tax bill, here's his market value. He gets a taxable reduction of 50% from his market value to his tax value. Nobody pays full market value in taxes. We all have a taxable reduction. That's just part of the math of how our tax bills work. Let's take a look at hers. So here we are, the woman with the shotgun house in the Northwest neighborhood. She gets a taxable reduction of a whopping 0.8%, not even 1% deduction off her property. Is that fair? Is that equitable? If we're not looking at this existing system, it's like, oh, I thought we stopped redlining. I thought we stopped taking money from poor people. Well, it looks like it hasn't stopped. Now, what's crazy is that $32,000 of taxes per acre, she's actually more productive than Mar-a-Lago. And now Mar-a-Lago is like a private club, and it's like a hotel. It's a cash cow, and it's paying very little taxes per acre compared to her. How is this fair? And it's like, surely it's just crazy Florida. It's not anywhere else. All right, well, here's Asheville. We bought the governor a house on top of a mountain over here. So the governor comes up to visit Asheville. Here's a house just down the mountaintop that's got a tennis court on top of it. Probably a rich person, because you don't want to go play tennis with the great unwashed, right? You want to stay on your mountain. Got it, fine. Here's a house across the street from the old Jim Crow era grade school in the African-American neighborhood with its lovely estate of 3 trees. This is my old house in West Asheville. So when you look at the taxable value, 1.4 million, 200,000, 81,000. Seems fair, seems reasonable. When you take the houses off the property and just look at the dirt value per acre, these are the numbers. I showed this to our county assessor, and I was like, Linda, how is it that somebody in this neighborhood, in the Burton Street neighborhood, has got dirt value this high compared to on top of the mountain? And her response was amazing. She goes, well, they probably use more police services. Like that was her response in 2009 when we had a black president. And I was like, really? Are you going to say that out loud in public? Would you say that? And she's like, no, I think I want to take that back. I was like, yeah, you probably should. Because when you glue the houses back on and you look at the taxes per acre, I don't have a mountaintop view. And why am I paying the most? And why is the wealthy person paying the least? And in Ohio, we did this analysis in Cuyahoga County just for a test. Out here in Pepper Pike, we grabbed a couple of houses, which is this way exurb of Cleveland. We went into the traditional African-American neighborhood and we grabbed a house on the Ohio City side, which is their hipster neighborhood. So these two houses in Pepper Pike, this one's great. It's like 11,000 square feet, big house. And then we grabbed a little mini mansion over here, high upper class there. This is your typical ranch burger. This is a house in Ohio City, 2 blocks away from the sewage plant and a highway. Really incredible location. And here's the townhouse that we grabbed. Doesn't even have, it has a yard that's like 7 foot by 7 foot right there. There you go. So this is the house in the African-American neighborhood. You can tell it's been blighted by all the vacant lots that are all over the place. And here it is, nothing magical to this one, just your average little American house. When you look at the taxes paid per acre of the 11,000 square foot house, the mini mansion, the low wealth African-American neighborhood, and the townhouse, how are these even remotely fair? And again, it's just tax system, it's just math. Now what's crazy about this, we did the same thing with the land analysis of the land underneath this building is pulling $414,000 for the dirt under her house. And she's just down the road from the downtown. So we went a little bit further out on her side of town and grabbed this house that's got this incredible view. 2 sides of it are out in the lake, incredible skyline view of Cleveland. And you can see her house about a half mile away right here, off in the distance. This Great Gatsby mansion on the lake is pulling a dirt value of $145,000 an acre for the dirt that is proud out here in the lake. That's what they're paying for their dirt value. This is the dirt under that townhouse 2 blocks away from the sewage treatment plant. Was that 3.5 times the potency of the dirt under her house? How is that fair? How is that equitable? Now let's go ahead and bring this house in. Now it's, they're kicking out $15,000 more than what this one is. This one's almost as valuable. The dirt under this house is almost as valuable as that on the left. How is that fair and how is that equitable? If we're not using our skills to do the math on this stuff and bring awareness to our community, we can't see how we're robbing ourselves blind and not treating people fair and equitably. We call this geo-accounting. We're not judging any of this stuff. Your accountant's not going to judge you if you buy a boat, right? Your accountant's going to get upset if you can't afford the boat. So when cities can't afford things, look at where you're giving gifts and incentives to people who don't really need them. We put the numbers on a map so you can see it, and the map tells you everything that's happening. And also, just to close, I want to recommend Chuck's book, Strong Towns. Chuck does an incredible job explaining the flip side of the engineering cost and the amount that we put into the infrastructure to drive and subsidize the system. And with that, I'll close with you just need to do your math. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. So if anyone has questions, we have about 30 minutes and we'll stay on just as long as for that 30 minutes to answer those questions. And just use the Q&A form at the bottom. And our first question is from Tony Visco. He asks, nearby neighborhoods were removed in order to allow for expansion of a large hospital system, employing over 3,500 people, leaving a large void. They were looking far outside the city to relocate the hospital. Would this be considered an appropriate trade-off for the survival of an asset of a hospital that has been expanded to a major health system? They pay in lieu in taxes, so it's a small footprint, but what about the other advantages for the community?
I guess, let's see here. I guess the question back, I'd probably need to see what the design is and what they're doing for the hospital. You know, in Utica, New York, and this is happening right now, there's an activist group in Utica that's fighting a hospital expansion. And the advocates for the hospital are saying, you know, it's in the center of all the population. So we made a population density map to show where the population densities are, just to, you know, call it on it and say, all right, well, you've got 3 different areas of population density. There's Oneida County, the 3-county area center point, and then the county, the Utica itself, where its center point is. And basically we made a triangle of the Utica center point, the 3-county center point, and Oneida County. And that makes a triangle of you can triangulate the geographic density or geographic center. The center of the triangle is right here. There are 2 hospitals already in the community, and yet they're going into the downtown right here where the proposed site is. They're going to tear down buildings that were built during the Erie Canal days and put a hospital there. And their argument is, we're going to bring jobs downtown. Well, the first question is, we already have 2 hospitals. This one hospital right here on the Faxton site has like 20 acres of extra land. So the next question would be, architecturally, how are you designing that building? Because I can tell you the Mayo Clinic in Rochester is an urban downtown hospital. It produces a tremendous amount of wealth in the downtown, but it's also done in an urban form. One of the medical office buildings is like 20 stories tall. So it's really efficient on the footprint. When you look at the hospital site that they're proposing right here, and just, you can see that it's nowhere near the triangle. Well, it's close, but it's not in it. But we just went ahead and said, all right, well, let's just draw a radius from the center point of Utica to the site and draw a circle. And there's a strip mall area over here. Like, why don't you just buy the strip mall area? So here it is, it's pulling a value per acre of about 600,000. When you look at the buildings that they're tearing down right here, this one's a drug rehab clinic and this one's empty. The empty building's pulling 700,000 of value per acre, and their drug rehab clinic is pulling 4 million an acre. You're tearing these 2 buildings down to build the hospital when you could just tear the strip mall down and it's less of an impact. So that's kind of how I would analyze it. I don't know if that answers your question, Tony, but I'd want to see how it fits. And with that, you know, if you're telling me it's producing wealth, let's see it. We can measure that. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Lisa
Joe,
Craig.
Robin, can you turn on your video so we can see you guys as well as the slides now, since we're in Q&A?
Absolutely. Thank you for the reminder. Lisa Craig has the next question.
I can't turn on my video because you have my camera turned off.
So while we're working on that, Lisa is asking about future conditions like sea level rise, extreme precipitation, wildfires, and she's wondering, how do we begin that dialogue on new or enhanced infrastructure to minimize future risk of flooding in historic communities, ensuring it's scalable and financially sustainable?
That's another great question, and that's a question we've got early on when we started doing this stuff. Okay, I think you can see my video now. And you know, I'll be honest. When you start to unpack this, it's all connected. And when we first started doing this work through public interest projects, public interest projects actually has this PowerPoint that's super awesome. It's called the Economic and Environmental Case for Urbanism. And what we found is that as you give people the presentation, it gets heavy real fast for the audience, for the citizen. You know, I just ran you all through a lot of slides in an hour, and it was only focused on taxation. And it was basically giving you the same story over and over and over again until it starts to sink in that you've got a place to start. When you start expanding it, what I find with citizens is it becomes overwhelming and you become paralyzed. It's like you don't know where to start. It is worth, if you have the ability to have the conversation, like Miami does this now, Charleston. You know, when Charleston saw that model of the power of what was coming out of downtown, it immediately became evident where their priority was and what to save. And again, let's go back to that image. When you're talking to your citizens, your fellow citizens, your cousins, they need to see why it matters. And let's go back to that. So if you can see my screen, this is a 3-county model for a reason, that you can see what's going on out here and how little value it is. Now, in their defense out here, they honestly have no idea what's going on downtown. This little peninsula, the lower peninsula of Charleston, that little 2,000 acre piece of land right there produces 4% of the entire state's retail taxes come out of that little peninsula. And the entire state is millions of acres. So it's highly potent, but they had to see that. They had to see how it's relative to them. Additionally, all these areas are producing a tremendous amount of stormwater runoff that's causing and contributing to the flooding that will end up wiping this place out. So, there's a lot of different things they could do. They could probably they're already starting to talk about different locks and things that they could do in the mouth of the bay. It's going to be super, super expensive. But you can see the reason why you'd want to preserve that from a valuation standpoint, aside from the cultural relevance and the architectural relevance and qualitative issues. The money's there to show it too.
Thanks. Rebecca would like to know, how do you show a community that the land has value and should not be treated as a commodity? What you've brought up has already happened to water in communities where heavy water users pay nearly nothing.
Rebecca, I want to recommend to you a book, Design with Nature, by Ian McHargue from 1969. And in that book, it's the birth of GIS, or the promotion of GIS. GIS was actually happening with some Canadians back before then, but Ian McHargue had the aha moment that this is how we can show people the value of the planet. 1969, that book was published. There are some great quotes. There's some great analysis. The guy's a riot. And if you email me, I can send you a video that somebody's posted. It's sort of like a presentation of the book is a video. And he's way ahead of his time. There's great quotes. One of my favorite quotes of his is the man on the moon will know the price of a gallon of oxygen. Think about that for a second. What would you pay for a gallon of oxygen if you didn't have it? And so he's pointing at the earth saying, this thing is giving us oxygen. There's a scene in the movie where he's in an argument in Minneapolis and he's showing a map of the wetland. And he's like, this is the wetland, stay out of it. Mother Nature is giving this to you for free. He's Scottish. He's like, do you know how expensive it is to reproduce a system that is purifying your drinking water system? How much would you pay for that? And yet, even with that data, and even with his presentation and that book, and a whole change to the landscape architecture profession, we still didn't learn those lessons. So what I would challenge you is, don't go down that road again. Don't make the mistakes that other advocates have done in the past of going around and telling people we're destroying the planet, because no one wants to hear that. People just tune you out because they feel personally attacked. You need to inspire people's creativity to say, hey, have you looked at the tax system? Have you looked at how we fund things? Have you looked to see the damage? Can I make it visual for you so you can see it? Because people are busy. They have lives. They have to get their kids to school. They're dealing with a pandemic too. So how can we make this information visual for people so they can see it? And that's one of the lessons that we took from Ian's book, is make a map and show it. But yeah, Design with Nature. The other book I'd recommend is Power of Habit. And there's a lot of great work on the psychology of decision making and how we choose the wrong thing. It doesn't matter what data you put in front of people. And a third book I'd recommend is called Predictably Irrational by Daniel Ehrlich. So Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. Predictably Irrational by Daniel Ehrlich.
And while we're talking about books, would you repeat the author of Strong Towns?
Oh, Strong Towns is, let's see, I'll just post it up.
I know some of your presentations are on YouTube. Does he have some as well? Because his presentation is excellent.
Oh yeah, Chuck has a ton of presentations. And I present with Chuck a lot, and it's interesting because just our personalities are two diametrically opposed people. I'm this Italian from upstate New York, and he's this Minnesotan from very rural Minnesota, Brainerd, Minnesota. And he's very Midwestern and Minnesotan about his style, but where I'm a little bit more animated and passionate, and sometimes I swear, but I can't help that. But we're really basically talking about the same issue from two different perspectives. We tend to focus on the revenue side. Where do you get your money, and do you understand where the revenues are created? He tends to focus on the cost side, but Strong Towns has expanded into all sorts of grassroots thinking, and he has a very popular website that you can subscribe to and read their blogs. But the book is pretty easy to read, and it's also it leans conservative. It's a very it's a good book to give to conservative members of your community because he speaks that language in the book. And a lot of that is we've sort of lost this ability to talk across the aisle. So that's one of the things I'd recommend is that, you know, I see my presentations as having a conversation with my father who's passed away, but you know, when he was around, he was a Tea Party guy and I couldn't talk sense to him. So I had to like learn to speak his language about revenue to get him to see what I was talking about from a smart growth perspective. So I think, you know, we have to be humble and patient about our audiences and try to find a way to engage and reach them.
Really good point. Ben would like to know if there's any work on quantifying values of district-wide or neighborhood connectivity, redevelopment behind walls versus new urban envelopes.
Yes. When we do our analysis in communities, we have to figure out how to send people bills for stuff. So this is an example in South Bend. And this is all stuff, it actually goes back to 15th century. Euler is the mathematical philosopher, and it's the Bridges of Kronborg, I'm pretty sure is the name of it, but it's network math. So here's 88 houses in we call this the lollipop land. It's this kind of lollipops on top of lollipops of cul-de-sacs. So there are 88 houses. Here they are. And we measured their roads, their water pipes, their sewer and storm sewer pipes, and then their total annual cost. So this is what the city should be either spending or saving into a saving account. So if I fix a building, and y'all know this, most of you work within architecture, when you build a building, you're going to know the useful life of that air conditioner. And so as a real estate developer, what I'm going to do is take a little piece of rent and put it in a reserve account, because my architect's going to tell me that air conditioner is going to junk out in 20 years and it's going to cost me $80,000 to fix it. So I need to have $80,000 20 years from now. So this is what we should be doing with the roads as well. Now, we don't charge people that. This is if you just take 10% of the property tax bills, you'd get $21,000. So there's basically a subsidy of $100,000 in this neighborhood that's just baked into the system. So when people say, I'm paying too much taxes, the first thing the city should do is show something like this and say, oh, really? So we're giving you $100,000 a year subsidy for 88 houses and you're paying too much? Okay. All right, let's take 88 houses and do them in a different pattern on a grid. So here they are, the roads, the water pipes, the storm sewers, and the total annualized is down to 70,000. If you pull 10% of theirs, they're at 9,000. And then let's take this one that's even older. that's actually closer to the cul-de-sac. The 1920s neighborhood, 10% payment in is basically, they're paying a little bit more actually at 22,000 versus the 21,000 over here. The cost, annualized cost, is 1.5 times more on the right than the left. So, or the net deficit, because you're paying less and you're getting more, is close to 2 times more on the right versus the left. So how you choose to develop your community, just at a physical standpoint, you're going to produce more costs. Now, I can tell you from a transportation standpoint, when all of these people only have one option in and out of that intersection versus all of the options that these folks have, that's also going to cause a different problem of congestion on this street. But that's just putting it aside and just talking about the infrastructure cost. So we showed this to them and we're just like, you might want to rethink the way that you do patterns. Now, as a citizen, I'm going to want a cul-de-sac community. Well, why not? Because I'm not going to have traffic going through. You're giving me this ridiculous gift of 2 times the subsidy. Like, why wouldn't people want that? So I don't fault the citizen that chooses to live there. They've been given this incredible gift. But I fault my community for not doing the math and putting it out there so that my politicians can understand that. But South Bend is doing that. Now, South Bend is doing it because they're not adding more people. So they're trying to figure out how they got into this position. But Sunbelt places are adding this stuff on the right, left, hand over fist. Is this all too depressing for everybody? Are you guys good? You know, it's hard to see I don't see your faces, so I don't.
Right, it's hard to know
how you're taking this.
Yeah. Joel has a question. Is there a way to be more fair in determining value? For example, would using zoning classifications to figure into value per acre be more effective?
You know, there's lots of ways to be more fair, but we have to find out and swim upstream a little bit to find a little bit of the why in this. And one of the things that I'd recommend is if y'all don't know Henry George and George's principles, I'd start there. So rather than tax me on what I do to my land, tax me based on my income or based on location or investment, what you put into the ground from a city standpoint, I should be paying at least that back. One of the things that Henry George came up with in the 1800s is think about being in Philadelphia and Boston and New York in the late 1800s as just boatload after boatload of European immigrants were coming into America, that those communities were getting really congested. There was a lot of tenement housing. And yet, if your family were the Copleys in Boston and they stepped off the Mayflower, they were lucky enough to be here early, they could just sit on that land forever. And so he asked the obvious question, which is, why aren't we taxing people based on the infrastructure so that the Copleys won't sit on that land and speculate and drive up the costs for everybody else in the community? Because that's what's happening. Somebody's got to, you know, think about that $400 lot in Kansas City, Kansas. What's 2% of taxes on $400 a year? You know, it's like that's nothing. Is that going to cover the cost of the garbage truck driving by every week? Of course not. So when you have vacant land, it's upside down right out the door. So charge people for it. We're going to charge, and this is what our basic attitude when we do our models is, you know, Apple knows the cost of the glass and the plastic and metal in the iPhone when they sell it to you, and they're going to get it back. So cities should do the same thing. Tax systems shouldn't be guessing games anymore. We have magic stuff called GIS software and Excel spreadsheets. This isn't hard to do. This isn't the 1700s. Well, you know, Henry George created, there was a movement that started up, kind of similar to a movement of new urbanism or something, where there were these advocates that were going around, they were having Georgist conferences, they wanted to change the tax system. And Elizabeth Maggie Phillips was a Georgist, and I love her eyebrows. She's got incredible eyebrows. But she thought, you know what? I'm not going to bother dealing with adults. I'm going to teach kids the Georgia system. And this is a game that she invented. And does it look familiar to anybody? It's Monopoly. So it was called the landlord's game. And she was trying to teach us proximate value of real estate. And that if you're on Boardwalk or Broadway, it's going to be taxed higher. Conversely, it's going to be worth more. And then if and put buildings on it. You win the buildings on things. So she was teaching us how to be efficient with cities with a board game. And, we could do the same with our tax system. So we just have to think it through.
Another question, how does zoning and land use play into the cost per acre math? Wouldn't that complicate the math?
You cut out there at the end, zoning and land use.
Sure. How does zoning and land use play into the cost per acre math? Wouldn't that complicate the math?
No. Zoning, if y'all want to have fun, ask your planning director how to run a tax bill. Most of them don't know how to do it. It's just, zoning is this, you have an opportunity to do something. What assessors are actually doing from a taxable standpoint is they're waiting for somebody to transact on a piece of real estate. And then there are these other biases that they have. So back to the dirt. If you got in an argument with the Cheyenne tax assessor about this property, her argument was, well, this is a really big piece of property. So there's less people that can afford it. And when you have less people in the marketplace, there's less people within the market that can get to it. So therefore there's less of a market demand than, let's say, a house, right? Or this small parcel over here. When you have more people competing for price of product, it's going to drive price up because there's more people, less supply. And I said, hold on a second. Does that true for other commodities like diamonds? If I get a bigger diamond with more carats in it, surely it's more expensive and less people can afford it. So surely isn't a bigger diamond cheaper? Like this isn't like you're buying toilet paper where you're buying it in bulk. This is land. It's a limited commodity. And she's like, oh, I never really thought about that. And it's, it's just a bias inside the system. Completely disconnected from zoning. They may consider zoning, but really they don't care because zoning is, from their perspective, zoning is just an abstract idea. Like zoning has value to only when people want to buy it. So what they're actually doing is they're waiting for, think about how hard the assessment job is, that you've got all these people out here living in these houses. They're not doing spreadsheets when they buy a house. I'll ask anybody on this webinar who created a spreadsheet of your cost benefit analysis of your house when you bought it. I mean, surely you did some of that. For the most part, you're just trying to solve a fight that you had with your spouse or something, where finally you agree on one house together, and most of us pay through the nose because we just want to end the argument. That's how houses transact. So what they're doing is they're going out in the marketplace, knowing that we're irrational actors, and they're seeing that some people paid too much. Some people got ridiculous deals because the owner didn't know what they had. And then they're making a bell curve of how that operates, and they're picking the middle of the market. That's how valuation gets set. And it's that simple. But then the assessors have these other biases where they offer discounts inside their math. So not looking at the discount that they give, large tract lands, all that stuff that I showed you on top of the mountain or by the bay in, or by the lake in Cleveland. That's because they're sizable properties, and that discount is baked in, and no one interrogates it. So it's, this is like shooting fish in a barrel. It's really easy to see this stuff. Look at this big lot up here and how cheap that is per acre. Actually, let's go look at the key down here. It's less than $5,000 an acre of value versus this light blue that's 3 times it. So it's like, what's up with that? So again, there's these perverse incentives baked into the system, and just don't assume that some adult thought this through. This is like 17th century tax policy that came over from England with us, and it's perverted our system of land use and land development because no one's paid attention to it. Well, the financial industry does, real estate developers do, but the cities don't. How are we doing on questions?
Sorry, I thought I was unmuting and I wasn't. We have just about 5 minutes left, and I know there's a lot of questions about contact information and to repeat some information, but if everyone doesn't mind, I'll skip that for this moment because we can get that to you later and go to the last question because we have a Kansas Cityan on here. As a resident of the Kansas City Metro, I'm curious if you looked at the Johnson County portion of the Metro. It likely factors heavily in the redlining of Kansas City, Missouri.
Oh, Johnson County. Well, first of all, they didn't want to share their data. So that was really awesome of them. But let's pull them up. Johnson County is, that's over on the Kansas side of the line. Where are you? Here we go. So you'll notice the lack of data down here. Usually when people don't share their data, it's a little bit of, Shakespeare, thou dost protest loudly. If you're that confident in your wherewithal of what you're doing, then why not share the data so that we can see it? We weren't at liberty to just go grab it because they weren't part of the client team to do it. So we were consultants. There's certain liberties that we can take and others that we have to draw a line on the politics. But you can see on the red line map, here's Johnson County right there. And boy, did they get a gift from our federal government. Now that's just the first piece of it. Let's add to this the loss of economic opportunity in these other areas that were then channeled in these areas because the skids were greased. Now let's add to it, once you did 30 years of economic destruction over here, what did we do in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s? Oh, that would be called urban renewal. That's when we went into neighborhoods that were blighted, right? And we started bombing them with slum clearance and highway projects and urban renewal projects that were mostly non-taxable. And you're extracting that wealth from those communities. Now that money doesn't disappear, it has to fall somewhere. So that ends up going transferred over here because you're also spending hundreds of millions of dollars sending highways out there to give them a gift. So I would argue that that's a transference of wealth. Actually, there's a pet project that we'd love to do. If there's anybody that does grant funding, we'd love to do this analysis in Charlotte because I found a video from 1965 where this economic developer says, downtown Charlotte is struggling and we need to help it. It provides 1/4 the city's property taxes and 23% the county's property taxes. We have the data now, and it's down to 9% and 7% respectively. So that begs the question: what happened to the 18% of taxes in value? Well, for the exurbs to grow in value, they have all these other gifts. Now, if you add to it how many hundreds of millions of dollars or billions that we spent in highways, that money's got to come out of the ground somewhere. So that, again, goes out to the suburbs. So when Johnson County brags about its wealth, it's transferred wealth that we could measure. But we just haven't had somebody to ask us to do that yet. But that'd be a blast to do. I think you can put a number on it.
Thank you so much. We have more really great questions, but I think we're out of time. This is probably a topic we could keep.
Well, how about,
on.
Yeah, well, email me, joe at urban-3, you can find us on our website, urban-3.com. If you need me to do a lecture in your community, I can do that. If you have an interest in a project, we can work with you on that. And we love doing this stuff, and we love exposing what other people can't see. But thanks for giving me this opportunity today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you to everyone behind the scenes that made this happen, and to all of you who participated. Appreciate it. And
All right,
see
take
you.
care.